Well, look, I really appreciate you accepting my invitation to join me on the podcast today. Like I said prior, this is a really low key conversation, just free flowing space. So, I don't have rigid questions for you, but I just have a sincere curiosity about your journey and some of the gems that maybe
Okay.
we can circle around and talk about. People that listen to this podcast are people that are looking to experience life in a deeper way, a richer way, by going into our experience inside and asking ourselves the questions of why do we suffer and what causes the most pain. And addiction, in my opinion, is probably one of the greatest like lessons or examples of the human condition. I don't know. Do you know a guy named Khalil Rafati? He wrote this
Mm,
book called I Forgot to Die.
oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
it's
No, but now I'm gonna
oh,
get
you're
it.
definitely going to get this book for sure. This guy spent, I don't know, I mean, he was getting blackout drunk at like 9 years old, got into, just like party drugs, MDMA and stuff when he was in his teens, early 20s,
Mhm.
started smoking heroin, injecting heroin, then got started using speedballs and pretty much spent, 20 years, 25 years in just a drug fueled oblivion. And
Mm.
got clean, opened up a couple rehab facilities on the West Coast, opened up this smoothie store called Sun Life Organics, and has created like 17 businesses at that point. I found this at one of his bookstores in California and read it probably 7 or 8 times over the last 8 years. And I talked to him about 2 weeks ago. And my interest in it is just there. It's so interesting how we cling desperately to something that gives us a little bit of relief from our life, and then it starts to
Yeah.
take everything, and then it swaps the terms on you big time.
It really
Yeah, in,
does.
in my own life, the addiction I've struggled with has been sex addiction and pornography addiction.
Mm.
And I've
Mm.
spent the last, say, probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years, really facing a lot of the complex, difficult relationship that I have with sex and with pornography. Being my earliest exposure to sex was through pornography, and it's
Mm.
been really interesting. I very much have wanted to spend a lot of time in conversations about addiction, just to gain a lot of insight from my own journey, and of course, just to share space with wonderful people who are a role model for others. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe we could start off with letting people get to know Courtney a little bit, and the story of getting involved with drugs and addiction and what that looked like.
Okay. I started experimenting very young, early teens, and kind of like Khalil, it was ecstasy and little things in high school, a little bit of cocaine, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It wasn't until, like most people, when I was prescribed liquid Vicodin that I had been from an oral surgery that kind of kicked off my opiate use. I did pills for many years. I snorted them. I have a deviated septum that impacts my breathing from snorting drugs. And it wasn't until the winter of 2012 that heroin and meth became part of my life. And then soon thereafter, I became an IV drug user. And again, like Khalil, I began speedballing, and that kind of became my issue. My drug addiction journey has the first half of it was, oh, it couldn't happen to me. Oh, it's not going to be me. I'm never going to do heroin. I'm never going to do cocaine. I'm never going to do needles. I'm never going to do these things. And I did every one of those things because you think that you're above it. You think that, well, that can't happen to me. It happens to, that's kind of the end game for people that invite heroin and pills and meth and drugs into their life. Eventually it goes downhill, and that was no different for me.
Mm. When did you have the
Yeah.
oral surgery?
2006.
So prior to that, it was all recreational drug use, and then once,
Yeah, like drink on a weekend, smoke some weed, take some Xanax, something like that. It wasn't continual use until I got prescribed liquid Vicodin. And then I kind of understood why everyone around me was doing Vicodin. And what's strange about opiates, and I don't know that and everybody would agree with me, but I feel like drugs in general, if you have insecurities or you have trauma or you have any of these things, there's this escapism that comes with these drugs where you can outrun your thought process and not dwell on reality, and you can like pretend that you're in a whole different place or a whole different person, and those drugs support that journey of escaping. And so then you know, I feel like you obviously chase the drugs because of withdrawal, but you also chase the drugs because of it allows you to stay in the space of bullshit,
Mm.
of things that aren't happening, or avoiding things that are happening, or avoiding who you've become, because the drugs just let you put a pause on that. The problems are there, but as long as you're high, you can kind of outrun the reality.
Yeah. Whenever you were taking the prescriptions, you said that
Mm.
you kind of started to see why people were doing this.
Yep.
What was that? What was that moment where you're like, "Oh, I get it."
Well, because I had been around a group of people that were already abusing opiates, and I remember being super judgmental about it and being like, "Oh, how's that Tylenol taste?" Because everything cut Tylenol. I thought, how ridiculous that they're snorting these pills, and I wasn't going to do that. But when the liquid Vicodin came into play, I was like, "Oh man, like it." I've even as a kid, I think I know that I've always kind of disliked who I was, or felt like I was supposed to be something different. You know what I mean? And I always had these really deeply rooted insecurity issues. And when I was on Vicodin or Percocet, those issues were just not there, and it was glorious. I thought, wow, so this is what it could have been if if I wasn't this way, or if this didn't happen to me, this is how I could feel.
Ah,
And then you confuse it for being like an actual like reality. Like that's not who you are. You're on drugs, and it's messing with your receptors, and it's making you think something, but your heart thinks, oh, this is it.
I
Like
done
this is
found
this
the
is where
cheat
it's at.
code, man. This is where I.
Yep, found the cheat code, and it's wow, yeah. It ends up really coming and bitch smacking the reality into you that like it's drug abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The relief from emotional pain and difficulty and being uncomfortable. It's really
Mhm.
interesting how it gives you kind of what you're after, and then
Mhm.
it like starts to give it to you in less and less less and less potency,
Yep.
and you forget why you started in the first place. You're just trying to re-achieve that level of potency that initially it gave you. I know that mine's been the same with sex and porn addiction. More and more and more
Yeah.
consumption with less and less and less reward, more and more and more consumption. And then you like kind of, it's not until, years and years later when you start to kind of wake up from the haze, you go like, what in
Yeah.
the world was that? Like I started stringing behaviors together to try to sustain this pursuit of a high that was ever elusive, and it just
Yep.
started because it gave you this like, oh, that's it, that's what I've been trying to feel right there.
Yep. And then when you try to make it worse, especially with drugs, when you keep trying to chase something and then the pills aren't enough, or you can't get the pills, so then it's heroin. And I mean, it's just such a nightmare journey of avoiding like looking within. I feel like I really just didn't think that recovery was in the cards for me.
Why not?
And I just didn't I don't know. I just was really doom and gloom, felt like this was it, and I mean, this is just who I was, and this was what happens to people like me. I don't even know
Oof.
how I adopted those thought processes, but I believed it. I thought, "Oh, and I was around like-minded people that struggled the same, that all had the same poor
Did you think
excuses."
like
Well,
I'm not this is the only way that I can achieve this feeling of like warmth and comfort that everyone else just has naturally because of my doom and gloom scenario?
I think I was angry. I think that addiction goes hand in hand with lack of accountability.
Mm.
I think for me anyway, where I was mad at things from my childhood. I was mad at people. I was mad for this and that and whatever. But I never really, like, as I used to really look at it like, I do these things because A, B, C, D happened, instead of being like, A, B, C, D happened, but I chose drugs.
That's a really great way to reframe it.
Yeah, like I chose the drugs. Nobody made me choose the drugs. It was a symptom of something
Yeah.
else, but it wasn't until I kind of quit the blame game
Yeah.
and started to look at my part in my problem that I was able to participate in like recovery, because I was so mad for so long. And then again with drugs, especially with IV drug addiction, IV drug addiction is soul shattering. It's something
What do you
different.
mean? Can you talk about that with more texture and
Yes.
details?
Oh yes.
Because that
I
started
did.
when? When was that? Was like 2014 ish.
Yes. It was right. Well, it was 2013, but it became daily use in 2014.
Okay.
Um, and the needle really, you think you know rock bottom, and then you learn there's basements,
Hmm.
and then there's basements to that part of rock bottom in the basement, and there's more basements. And I feel like I found them through IV drug use, because IV drug use, it's so different because when you withdraw, I'm not discounting anyone's drug addiction by saying this. I'm saying obviously pills, if you're eating them or snorting them, it's an awful withdrawal. Everyone's situation is different, but I'm saying that needle, it's different. It's going directly into your bloodstream. I was shot into my neck,
Yeah.
and so the withdrawals are so much different, and it's so not about getting high. Once you're on the needle, it's about getting well and about feeling baseline, so you can even be around people and them not realize just how sick you are. I had no idea how desperate dope sickness could be, because with dope sickness, you don't even fear death. You're going to pick stuff up off the floor, hoping that it's dope, and you're going to inject it into your body. That's wild. That's
Okay.
wild.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I love this conversation already. I just want to get into the details of the nitty gritty here. The
Yeah.
like that. How quickly how quickly it is that begin to change, where you go like, I'm getting high, I got liquid Vicodin, this shit kind of rocks, and then let's see, that was 2006. Okay,
Six.
so then we're kind of fucking
Mhm.
around with that. Heroin enters the picture
It was years.
2012, right? And
Yep.
at that point, are you still kind of going up? We're still like, damn, this shit kicks even harder. I'm feeling even better.
I never thought I would use heroin, but I'm not sure how many people are familiar with like what happened in the state of West Virginia. West Virginia, over like a decade span, prescribed people in the state like 400% more than the national average combined of opiates.
Wow.
And then the pill mills got shut down, and then you had to go to pain clinics. So like these people that had been prescribed for years of pain pills, I mean, that everybody went to heroin. I feel like the shift was clear in the state of West Virginia. West Virginia did West Virginia wrong in the
Was
way
there a
of what they were
policy
prescribing and how much more.
Was there a
A
policy
what?
change? What was it, a policy change or something that changed the amount that they prescribed so everyone dropped to
I think
heroin?
it was national. Yeah, I think it was national. Like
Oh,
you had to go to a pain clinic. So
gotcha.
now regular doctors, you couldn't just go in and go to a ER, or I mean, you could go to an ER, but you couldn't go to like a regular doctor and get pain pills. They're going to send you to a pain clinic
Gotcha.
to try and offset the opiate addiction.
But so many people was
And
already
the
on it at
people
that
that,
point.
yeah, and and good people, teachers, regular people, people that don't have a shit show past, regular people. It happened to so many good people, and then they end up on heroin because of how, like, a way to remedy their pain.
What's so weird about addiction, and like I speak from my experience with sex addiction, with porn addiction. The conversations I have with other people who are in recovery is really interesting. Even in with like my conversation with Khalil, what's really wild to me is how quickly you lose perspective on why you feel just how bad you feel. Because like
Oh
you're
yeah.
not like with porn addiction or sex addiction, and I'm not trying to change the conversation to that. I'm just saying that's the only place I can relate from. Like
Right.
you're not, nothing feels great, nothing feels good, nothing is like hitting the spot that you like. You're, oh, that's what I've been after. It's this ever shrinking reward, but it's the only, for some reason, it's the only one you can think about. And so even though it's like getting less and less rewarding, and you're and if you just took a pulse check, you're in such a bad situation and you're feeling like shit, and it's like psychologically you're anxious or stressed, and like you're kind of falling apart, but the only thing you can think about to relieve your situation is your drug of choice.
Absolutely.
That's such a
It's
weird
bizarre.
thing.
And it's awful because people will say, how can you not pull your shit together for your kids, or how can you do this and put your mom through this? And it's like, okay, so the withdrawal takes over all your perspectives. It because your main focus is to avoid being dope sick, is to avoid going without, because it is such a physical and mental, oh, it's such a nightmare. Like I feel very blessed in the way that, I tried and failed with getting into recovery several different times, but when it finally stuck, I became so scared of drugs. I mean, I won't even take Benadryl.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just scared of everything now. um, because I wasn't scared for so long. I had no fear with using, but people are often like, "Oh, I can't believe you could do that to your kids or to your family." And it's like, believe it.
Believe it.
It's believe it. It's so not about, oh, I'm choosing drugs over that person. It's your brain is all consumed with avoiding the withdrawal.
And it's like such a addiction is this weird parasitic thing that, like,
That's a great way to put
if like you had another reason for being on earth, like there was another, like you were born so that you could something, like insert what you find your soul's purpose is: music, being a mother, opening a business, writing a book, discovering something. Like there was a point for you being here, and then it just got like just hijacked by this thing, and then there you are just pushing this button over and over and giving all of your soul to it. It's fucking wild.
every bit of it. And it's funny that you say that, because when I got into recovery, the first 4 years, it was like a journey. And then I felt like, man, I just don't want to be just that girl that got off dope. Like, I don't want to just be that girl, so now I'm in college again.
Yeah.
Third time is the charm, because I thought, man, I just, it's like nice when you first get into recovery, like, oh, cool, I got, this is great. But then you're like,
Now
am
what?
I only the person that, now what? So I started sharing to back up a little bit, I am a longtime blogger.
Cool.
And journal keeper. My grandma got me a diary when I was like in fourth grade. So I've always liked to write or share or whatever. So when cell phones got the video capabilities to video, I started doing private video journals. That's where all that footage I have of me using came from. That wasn't stuff I was posting. That was from private video journals.
I was kind of wondering what they were like, how you felt so inspired to grab your video camera.
I was isolated. I was so isolated, and I kind of figured that there's a couple videos that, like, I obviously have and probably will never share, but one of them, it clearly states, like, I believed I was going to die. I believed my drug addiction was going to kill me, and all that was going to be left was going to be these video journals, which is awful when you think about what I was leaving behind for my family.
Yeah, you're like, hey, check this out. Here's your mom.
Hey, look, this is what was going on. Yeah, fuck. But I was alone. It was just me and Moo and my other dog.
In that bathroom?
I was alone a lot of the time. In the bathroom,
yeah,
yes.
Bathroom.
And I videoed so much. So it wasn't until 4 years into my recovery that I started to watch those, because I couldn't stomach it. I couldn't see it. And when I started to watch them 4 years in, I was like, oh man. And then TikTok had some like recovery challenge thing, like some hashtag recovery challenge, and I participated in it. And then when I realized how big the recovery community is online, I felt like obligated to share.
Yeah.
Because I don't remember feeling like I had a chance in hell when I was stuck in that struggle.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a lot of it online like there is now. Now you can find inspiration all over the place. But back in 2017, I don't remember I mean, maybe I wasn't seeking it out either, but it wasn't like part of my algorithm.
Yeah, of course. What was it like? Like, what was it like in the bathroom with a syringe just chasing darkness all the time for 2 years?
I would get into these deep psychosis, clearly from the videos. I could complete again with these drugs, with these IV drugs, and I was speedballing. I was mixing either cocaine and heroin or meth and heroin together, and it would give me, hours and days of just I'm in a whole different reality that nobody else is in.
No
Just
one else.
nobody else is in. It's just me. And so all this time would go by, like these years would go by, and it would feel like so fast. But
Yeah.
to my loved ones, it was,
So
it
long.
was a nightmare. Yeah, it was a nightmare. And then I ended up moving out west in the summer of 2017, hoping for like this new reset, this whole new life. I was promised this guy gave me a job, and it was going to be all these great things.
What
And
year is
there's,
this?
2017, the summer of 2017.
Okay.
So I went out west and, trusted this guy, moo out there. I was starting over. And then lo and behold, he was also a heroin addict.
Oh.
Um, but it was weird because, I had never known what a narcissistic sociopath was. You hear the words. I never had experienced anything like somebody like that. And he was like so good and so nice and so helpful. And then one day he just kind of snapped. And the pills, because he was a pill addict, but the heroin came out, the abuse came out, the violence came out. And it was like, I tell people a lot that trauma led me out of my addiction,
Hmm.
because he was so, he's since passed away from drugs, but he was so mean and he was so abusive and he would be so violent towards me. And if I would fight back, he would threaten to hurt Moo.
Hmm.
Moo took a chunk out of this man's arm back in 2017. And I mean, it was such a nightmare out there. But I felt like if I didn't get, and I hate to say it like this, I'm not ever going to make light of domestic violence. And I don't often share about my experiences with it. But I feel like I got beat into submission for recovery in so many ways. I felt like, okay, this is it. I'm done. We're done here. I'm done with this. My brother had just passed away. All he ever asked of me was to get my shit together. This guy's beating my ass. My dog's traumatized. I'm over at the other side of this country. I'm out there with not a hope in the world.
Yeah.
So when I finally surrendered to move to Florida and get into recovery, I think it was the first time I really meant it. I went through the motions before with psych wards or rehabs and
What?
and going to jail and go to prison.
What was different? Like, why was it this time? Had you finally dug deep enough to realize that it was only going to keep going deeper, and there was no nirvana
I
down
had
there?
enough. I had enough. It was so bizarre to go through like the psychological obstacle course of that relationship, because I had never been I'd never experienced somebody so crafty, so effortless. So I mean, he was just so good at the manipulation. I really thought I was moving out there for a fresh start. I really thought that it was going to be all these great things, and then it was an absolute nightmare. But without that nightmare, it wouldn't have like shook me the way I needed to apparently be shook to surrender to recovery. I found that last basement of rock bottom in Oregon.
Did so for a while were you like chasing? For a while were you chasing better, like higher and more intense and harder drugs, and the experience was about chasing that dragon for a bit? Was it like kind of the optimistic, like I'm going to get even higher and it's going to be even better?
I for several months, I before I went to Oregon, I thought people were ripping me off. And I went to my family doctor, and he ran blood work, and he told me he wasn't entirely too sure how I was sitting across from him, and that the only way that he could explain it from the amount of fentanyl that was in my system was that I don't metabolize it. My body doesn't metabolize it the same, and I should be so grateful. And I remember being pissed because what? I can't do a little bit and get high. I have to do a half-gram shot to, you know what I mean? I was angry, and looking back, I mean, he was right. Like, I was blessed. My not metabolizing fentanyl is probably the only reason I'm here. So
Just
then I
because you
found
couldn't get high off
carfentanil.
fentanyl?
Not like everybody else could. So I thought people were ripping me off,
I got
but
mad and went to my doctor and said, am I getting real?
yeah, my doctor was like, "Listen," and then I found what they. I mean, I can't verify if it was really carfentanil. I've had people tell me that there's no way that I was injecting real carfentanil, which I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's like elephant tranquilizer.
Mm,
It's like 10,000 times stronger than morphine, but it was told to me that it was carfentanil. They called it China White back then,
yeah.
and it was very, very strong. And that was definitely me chasing as high as I could get.
That's where we
Um,
locked ourselves in the bathroom and went to work.
that's when it started. And I mean, man, some of those videos, I'm just in a whole different, like, it's
Reality.
crazy. Yeah, it's crazy to look back at it now because I'm like, that drugs are bad.
I mean, they're
Drugs,
bad, man. They're bad. I mean, I don't know. Like a lot of people don't ever use drugs. Some people get really fucked up with drugs, but
yeah,
I mean, I've had I've had wonderful drug experiences throughout my life, and I've had but I know how insanely. It's hard to understand how reality works when you haven't done drugs. It's hard to
oh, for sure.
understand the perception of your reality, and that your personality or what you're pushing back out into reality is the thing that survives in that domain of which your
Yeah.
brain's projecting around you. And so, like, I totally get it when you're, I get it a little bit what you're talking about when you say, like, dude, I am living in a totally different dimension in that bathroom.
Also, I do feel like and people, we all can feel how we want to feel, but I classify certain things as drugs and I classify other things as not drugs. And I think that's how I kind of collected the kind of a following that I have, is because I utilized cannabis recovery
hmm
to get and stay into recovery. I know that anything can become a drug. Um, but I also look at things like microdosing and things that people do on a more natural side as being, I'd rather see somebody go on a microdose journey than go get on Xanax.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's different levels of things. I don't think there's such thing as healing heroin or some meth that helps you.
Healing
There's
heroin.
trauma. Yeah, I don't think any of those things exist, but I think that cannabis used in the right way can really be helpful. And I think the same with certain psychedelics can also be used in a way to really get through some of that, because you really collect some trauma on those journeys with those drugs.
Have you gone through some different medicine experiences to begin to change and heal from the trauma?
I started microdosing in 2021.
Microdosing what?
Mushrooms,
Mushrooms.
but then I took it down to nano dosing, which is next to nothing. And currently, I only take a nano dose maybe once a month, which is really just it. It's funny because people used to suggest it to me. I lived in Denver in 2019, and people were like, "Oh, you should microdose." I'm like, "You're offering me drugs? Like,
You know who you're talking
I
to?
don't, I don't want to do this. Like, no, I'm not
Look
doing
at this
this."
video.
Yeah, watch this bit. And then I moved to Florida and I joined a mom's group, which is really uncharacteristic of me to, 'cause I thought, how am I going to make friends? I have a kid. How's he going to make friends? And the girl that ran the group was a microdose coach. And I thought, okay,
Mm,
so this is, maybe this is the universe telling me to give it a shot. There's a reason they're magic. I don't like psychedelic experiences at all. I'm
really?
not, yeah, no, not for me.
Not
Not
cool.
long ones. I mean, in my past, I've definitely had some DMT experiences that were
Sure.
worth it for sure. Reset, worth it. We'll never say a bad thing about DMT.
But
Um,
after recovery, like after 2018,
yeah,
then DMT had the experiences.
yeah, and it's crazy that it's just like sometimes once is really enough. It
Mm,
really gives you a different type of reset. And when I started doing like the research on like dimethyltryptamine, like what it does with your pineal gland, it's like all
yeah.
these things are so helpful. But to someone again who's never done drugs, they're like, "Oh, she's not in recovery. She's
Yeah.
promoting DMT." And it's like, cool. If you don't know about that, then you should go find out about it.
I want to toss an operating definition into this conversation. You know who Dr.
Okay.
Andrew Huberman is?
I don't.
Okay, he is the professor of neuroscience at Stanford University. He has,
Okay.
I think he has the most popular podcast ever in the world, something like that. If not, it's definitely numero uno everywhere in terms of mental health and psychology
Okay.
and stuff. Anyways, he, when talking about addiction, defines addiction as an increasing narrowing of the things that give you dopamine.
Mm,
And
mm.
so I think when people were like, well, that bitch ain't in recovery because she's smoking DMT or she's smoking weed or she did magic mushrooms or whatever. Like,
Right.
if those things are very low for abuse. You know,
Yeah.
weed you could talk about. Weed might be a little bit more controversial in that statement, but magic
It
mushrooms,
is.
any type of psychedelics, are like almost anti-addictive in the sense that they do not engage the reward pathway of the brain. They're somewhat challenging. You know, a lot of people don't
Yeah.
even like them, but
Yeah.
they can be really informative, healing, and the experience itself can do a lot of good. So I think that's a helpful thing to have in your back pocket when someone says some bullshit like that. You're like,
Absolutely.
hey, dude, this is not like this makes me enjoy. This makes me be able to receive dopamine and reward from more things in my life because now I value time at the park with a friend, or I value a
Yeah.
book, or I value doing my hobbies more because I've been reminded of how valuable life is and how short this experience is.
That and I started taking Sheilagy. Are you familiar with Sheilagy?
No, Sheilagy.
Or She Legit? I don't know how it's really said.
She
But
legit.
yeah, that's what I call it because it sounds good. I only started about a month ago because I stopped consuming cannabis. I
Mm.
stopped smoking a long time ago because in 2019, I was diagnosed with emphysema and COPD from being front and center for manufacturing meth during the 2013, 2014 years. So my
Making it?
lungs trash. My
Were you
lungs were
making it?
I was right there. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was definitely a helper elf in that situation. I got in trouble for that as well, and did just a tiny bit of time because I only got convicted of maintaining a dwelling because my name was on the house.
Mm.
So I got hit with a year, did 6 months, very lucky. Still got out and just was a complete shitstorm. But
That was during the drug period, though.
it was during the same. Oh yeah,
How'd you survive
meant
in prison?
it wasn't prison, it was jail, and it was West Virginia, and I just like looked the part. Like I don't know,
Yeah, but
like
I
it
mean,
was
like,
primarily addicts in there, so it wasn't like a tough go
but
in
how'd you
there.
get? Did you get drugs?
How did I? What do you mean?
Like in jail, you got drugs?
In jail, I chose drugs a couple times. Nobody drugged me.
No, no, no. I mean, like, you went to jail. What year was it?
2015 when I did my 6 months.
Two, gotcha, 2015. So, I mean, we're doing heroin and meth at this point.
Oh yeah.
So, when you went to prison, I'm saying, like, were you like, fuck, I don't have any drugs? Or was it easy to
Oh
find
yeah.
drugs?
Had they have hit me with a year and a day, I would have went to prison. But I had to stay in county, so I got hit with a year in county. I only did 6 months, but when I got there, I was so sick, on the floor with like a mat, like you would have in like elementary school, like PE. It was awful, and matched me being dope sick with an issue with one of the other ladies there. We got into a physical altercation, and I mean, it just kind of set the tone. Nobody really bothered me. It wasn't like I was like Billy Badass or anything, but like I got in
Yeah.
that one fight when I was dope sick when I first got there, and it was smooth sailing the
So,
rest of the time.
were you able to get drugs while you were in jail?
Oh yeah.
Gotcha. So, you were able to continue the addiction in jail.
Not as consistent, and my addiction was worse when I got out. I didn't even think it was possible. I thought, oh, this is good because when you're in jail or in prison, everyone has the same mindset. When I get out, I'm doing it right. When I get out, I'm not doing this or that. And
Yeah.
it's bullshit. It's bullshit. I had to leave the whole state, like the whole area, and stay in Florida. Because if I would have went back to West Virginia, you have too much access. I think people underestimate the value of leaving the scene of the crime. Some people think that it's
Mm.
running away. Call it what you want. Save my life because I can go to Walmart
Yeah.
and
Call it what you want,
yeah,
man. I'm
call it what you
good.
want. But whenever I go to Walmart or go somewhere, nobody knows me. Nobody's like, oh,
Yeah.
I used to use with her, or I seen her this place, or
Yeah.
nobody gives a shit about me walking through Walmart. If I
Yeah.
was in West Virginia, I would run into my past all the time. And then you feel compassion for people that are still stuck in it, and you'd go around them. And I'm a people, places, and things person. It's the law for me. I don't go around people, places, or things. I mean, I don't really go anywhere.
I, I know I saw a video on your Instagram. You said, this is my first time I've been out of the house all day
Yeah,
since
I don't go.
2018.
I don't go places at all. I'm a homeschool mom, so we belong to a co-op here. So like we do stuff every Wednesday, and I might go
Yeah.
grocery shopping, but I don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
I think I ran the streets long enough to understand there's really no value in it for me anymore.
So now, now that you've gained a lot of distance from that confusing world of addiction, now what is coming up for Courtney as like, what's this life about for you? What is this journey about for you? What's your purpose?
Well, I think that now, it's funny, you wipe your nose, you feel guilty. Like,
Nah, like I promise.
I swear I'm not doing anything.
You start the interview, you're like, ah. I said I could not do it for 6 years, and I did it. I did not do it for 6 years.
6 years. For me, I feel like I got a second chance with my family, and I know that that's not the case for everybody, but I'm like super hyper focused on my family and my kids. I have Price who lives with me, and my daughter still lives in West Virginia with her dad, but she's about to graduate high school in May. So hopefully she's down here, whatever she wants to do, like I'll support it. But my life now is primarily geared towards correcting things. Like I screwed school up twice in my active addiction years. I went, looking back, I feel like I went because I just wanted to get like the money, and then I just would screw it off. So it took me a long time to be able to get all the pieces and parts together to where I could go back to college. So I've been in college since January. Currently have an A in everything I'm doing so far. I'm going for my bachelor's in accounting because I never figured out how to manage money, and I want to eventually have nonprofits, and because I just don't think that there's enough said about people that have animals that want to go into rehab but won't because they have nowhere to trust their dogs. I don't think there's a big enough network of people that would help, because some people, like I'm one of those people that avoided rehab because I didn't have anywhere for my dog to be.
Yeah.
Which I know to some people would sound crazy, but when that becomes your only thing, like your only source of like continual like love and support, it's like an animal,
Yeah.
a recovery animal. I feel like I'd like to eventually run some type of nonprofit that helps people to be able to go into rehab and keep their animals safe.
That's super
So,
cool.
yeah, I'd like to do that.
When you talk about your family, it makes me think about earlier you said people look at you and think like, how could she do that? And instead of being there for her family, how could she do that instead of being home with her family or coming out of the bathroom? How could she do that? But the way that your brain's working at that time is so chained down. And there's one particular video that, sorry, my screen on my computer keeps going black, so I just keep having to reach in and reset it. There's a particular video where you're talking about like I'd rather die than get sick.
Yeah.
What is that? What's that feel like when sickness is coming on?
That video. I know which one you're talking about because I'll know that was one of the lowest points in my drug addiction. I had tried to stop using, and I'm like apologizing to my daughter and apologizing because I couldn't do it. I was coming off of what carfentanil or something stronger than fentanyl, whatever it actually was. We didn't test drugs back then, which is
We just
crazy.
injected them.
Yeah,
We tested them with our bodies.
with our body. Yeah, there was no testing kit for
Two
that.
thumbs up for this one.
But for me, it was like an apology video because I was done. Like I was going back to using because I couldn't do the sickness. It feels like you're on like icy fire. I don't know how to explain it. The body agony that from dope withdrawal is crazy. And because I had to stack them, I was coming off of coke, meth, heroin, whatever, all together because I was speedballing, and
Mm.
it was just it was an actual nightmare. And all you can focus on is the hurt or remedying the hurt. So you
Just
can't think
trying,
about your
like, I could feel
family.
better. I could just
Yeah,
feel
like
better if
I
I just did a
can't.
little
Yeah,
bit.
it's desperation at its most profound for me in my experience. I don't miss dope sickness at all. And what's weird is if I get a little bit sick at all, my brain still associates it with being dope sick, even though it
Mm.
is not that. Like I had COVID a couple years ago. I went to a New Kids on the Block concert, and
Yeah.
I got COVID there. And I remember comparing it the whole time, like, well, it's not as bad as dope sickness. It's not as bad as dope sickness, but it still felt like so similar. So any ailment that even mimics dope sickness, my brain's like, ugh. It's
Yeah.
clearly not that, but it still registers that way in my mind for some reason. And I'm 6 years in, and it still does that.
Yeah. Um, One way that Khalil described smoking crack in his book afterwards, he said he smoked crack for the first time on accident. That's a funny story, but
You know?
yeah, hey, trip and fell into a crack pipe, my friend. I'm sorry.
Well,
And
I
then
mean,
the next morning, he said, he spent the next 9 hours just smoking all this crack with these guys, and then he was on his way home, and he like talked about the way that he felt was absolutely just like he had lost two family members in the
oh
same
yeah,
day, like that. And
you
that's the
crack's
crazy.
awful. Crack's
That's what's
awful.
crazy. You smoked crack?
Oh my god, yeah, crack's so bad. Whitney was right. Crack is whack. It's
Oh,
awful
crack is.
because what I've learned in my drug experience is that as
Was it
fast
Whitney Houston? Who smoked crack? Whitney Houston?
Whitney and Bobby for sure.
Is
They
that
were
Houston though?
Yeah, Whitney Houston. And there's an interview with her, I think with like
Crack
Barbara
is
Walters,
whack.
where she said crack is whack.
Hey,
Um,
she's right, huh?
she's very right because what I've learned in my experience with drugs is if it's a fast onset, it's an even
Boom.
faster withdrawal. And crack's fast. And so once it
Oof.
wears off, it's impending doom. Same with IV drugs. When it wears off, it's intense. Whereas like some drugs, like in the beginning of my drug use, you could eat a Vicodin or something, and eventually it hits, and then it fades away.
Yeah.
And then you start
Yeah.
to snort them, and it hits a little faster, and it fades away, and then heroin, boom. But as soon as it's out of your system, I mean, you feel it.
Tanked.
You feel, yeah. It's the same with crack. Crack's awful.
It's so wild that your brain, you can chemically fuck with your brain. I was searching for the best word there, just fuck comes up. You can chemically fuck with your brain to recreate the psychological setting that you would be in the worst situation you could ever experience.
Oh yeah.
Ever. And it's just because you found that button or behavior or drug that sprung it up for you, and you just fucking just absolute the most you could, abused it, and do you know who Anna Lemke is? There's a book, Dopamine Nation, that she writes.
No. But I
She
have
gives
heard of Dopamine Nation, but I've not read it.
There's Anna Lemke. She's also at Stanford University, and she's the head of their addiction clinic, and I guess she's a psychiatrist too. Anyways, she talks a lot about one of the most important findings in neuroscience and psychiatry in the last 50 years is that pain and pleasure are co-located. They are not two ends of a spectrum that are diametrically opposed. They're the same lever that bends to one way or the other. And she describes it as the homeostasis process. This is really interesting, I think, is that you're like, if I tilt this lever to the side of pleasure, oh, that feels good. Your body wants to have homeostasis, so it doesn't just go back to center, but it tilts in the opposite direction to pain.
That
And
makes
then
sense.
back to center.
That
So
makes a lot
just
of
like
sense.
kicking a seesaw, yeah. And so what she talks about is that when you find something that feels good and you do it, it's really important that you allow your body to tilt to pleasure when it feels good, and then you release and allow yourself to feel a little bit down because you rode the ride, and it's okay that after eating one slice of cake, you kind of feel sad that you want another slice of cake, but that's okay. That's just how it's supposed to go. And then if you let that ride, you go back to baseline.
Yeah.
And she says that, if when you let go of that other side and you start to feel it tip towards pain, if you instead grab the pleasure again and try to drive it down, then essentially you accrue the neuromodulators in your brain, like cortisol,
Yeah.
I guess norepinephrine or something. There's a whole host of them that she talks about that essentially weight your scale to the side of pain,
Makes it
that
worse.
just build up and build up and build up and build up, and then you're sitting there just like trying to get some relief from the pain you've created
Yeah.
from your
That
abuse.
actually makes a whole lot of scientific sense.
And then that's kind of, I think, a good illustration to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, of why in the depth and the darkness of the confusion of addiction, you just keep beating the same fucking reward, even though it's given less and less and less, because you feel like you've accrued. Like, think about how amazing you felt on those drugs, Courtney,
Yeah.
and then just think about the fact that psychologically, neurochemically, your brain had to tip the other side,
Oh yeah, and
and
it
you
did.
borrowed some. Yeah, it did.
It
You borrowed
did.
some pleasure, and then you didn't pay back the debt, and then you borrowed some pleasure and didn't pay back the debt, and then eventually, it's there, and you have to go through it,
Oh
and
yeah.
that's probably the recovery process.
Oh yeah. The recovery process is definitely bizarre. It's super bizarre. The first year is really tough, but I think that's the same with like any addiction. But had I not have gotten pregnant for my son, I don't know that I would have stayed in recovery. It's hard to tell,
What,
I got
like maybe the
pregnant.
first year or two out of
I got
recovery?
pregnant like, geez, like 2 weeks into recovery
You
with
were
my
sober and you're like, let's do it. Let's make another
well,
one.
my current daughter. My kids have one dad. One dad, and he had brought my daughter down to Florida to kind of see me, to be like, your mom's in recovery, like let's go. It was kind of like, thanks bud, and then got pregnant. Like we're
Oh, wow.
we're friendly, but we're not together. But we're good, we're a unit of some kind. But so I got pregnant like 2 weeks in, and everyone was like, shit, she's gonna fuck
Mm.
this up, this is a nightmare, and I thought, for some reason, I really felt that I wouldn't. And my grandmother, she's just the best. She called me because she knew that I was considering termination, because I was,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm fresh off of a incredible trauma with violence, and then my IV drug addiction and all these different things, and I had, 2 weeks into recovery pretty much. And she called me and she said, I don't want you to make a decision that you're going to regret. Do you think that you can be a good mom? And I was crying and I was like, yeah, and I don't know why. And she was like, then that's all you need to know. And you need to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And don't let anybody tell you what you need to do. Because a lot of people were very vocal. You shouldn't do this. What business do you have? And they weren't wrong considering my history. But, I was tossing around the idea of, not putting another kid through it and counting myself out. So if my grandma wouldn't have called me and been like, listen, you got to listen to you. Don't listen to
Yeah.
anybody else. If this is something that you want to see through, then you need to do that. And that's what I did. And I think it saved. I think that my daughter, losing my brother, Moo, having my family, there's all these factors that really like built up what I needed to have like a recovery toolbox or whatever. But getting pregnant was like the anchor,
Hmm.
because then it was that was it, because my daughter, she was really young. She was like 6 when I started like heavy drug use. And when I got pregnant for her brother, she was very clear, like, he doesn't need to know anything about any of this, and you just need to give him everything that you got. And I have. And so, I mean, really for me, family and loss and trauma, all of it tumbled into me being able to recover somehow.
Mm. Yeah.
I feel very lucky.
Yeah, you are very lucky, Courtney.
Yeah, I really feel very, very lucky because I have a lot of friends that
Um,
didn't make it.
oh God, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
What what advice do you have for somebody who's struggling with addiction of any kind?
Don't listen to themselves. Your mind lies to you. Your mind lies. Looking back, and I know it's cliche, but God, I could have listened to the people that loved me. Because listening to yourself, clearly someone that doesn't love you, like clearly I didn't love myself when I was listening to my own narrative. Like, oh, this is just who I am. This is all I'm ever
Mm,
going to be, or I deserve this, or they'll be better off without me. I wish that I would have just listened to the ones that loved me more than I did because they were trying to lead me out and I was just putting up roadblocks every step of the way. If I would have just listened to people that love me instead of listening to myself, because I feel like your mind lies to you in addiction. It doesn't really allow you. It's like a really bad relationship, another relationship that isolates you from everything that's good. And if I would have just listened, and then there's a method that I've adopted over the years and I tell people about too that if you can't do it for yourself, because people say, oh, you have to get into recovery for yourself, you have to get sober for yourself. That's bullshit. It's absolute bullshit. You don't do it for yourself at first. It becomes about you eventually. But I did
mm,
it for different reasons. For my brother that passed, I couldn't apologize to him in person, so my recovery was like a my way of
mm.
apologizing every day to him. I did it for my daughter, but there's a method where you can just get out a piece of paper and you write down the advice that you would give your kid or you give your best friend or give your mom or give whoever is important in your life. If they're in your exact same situation, they feel the exact same ways that you do about themselves, about life, you write down the
Yeah.
advice you'd give them and then force yourself to take it. Because
Mm,
if you wouldn't take your own advice, why would they? So how would you,
yeah.
so there's like different mind like retraining your brain little things that I've done along the way, but I definitely think that that's a good one.
Let me plug my computer in real quick.
Okay.
I one one question I have is how do you still feel impulses to use?
No, I don't know how I got this lucky. Like I feel so heartbroken for people because I remember what that feels like, the yank towards wanting to use. I developed a fear. I'm just scared of it all because I'm not entirely too sure how I made it. Like I'm very grateful.
I'm done. I'm not even gonna go back in there and look. I don't even.
I
I don't
I
want to
don't
see the
even
game
know.
tape.
Yeah, like I feel so grateful that I made it, and also I'm afraid to lose. I mean, it takes a lot to get into recovery and to stay
Yeah.
there. But I'm just scared to throw it
Yeah.
away. I don't feel and truthfully, I feel like I learned everything that drug addiction was going to teach me, and I'm alive to even be able to talk about it. So I don't see any real value in even having the yank, but I'm grateful that I don't. Now, had I stayed in West Virginia, I would always have been one bad mood away from a relapse, a very accessible relapse. I had to
Just
completely,
because the accessibility of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I don't have that in Florida. It's very much just me and my family and my few little friends, my little bubble. Um,
Your mom group.
my mom group, yeah, it's so funny because they're these very they're good women, and I don't think any of them really know what a shit show. It's funny. They're very granola, and I'm just I don't know that they know. Some of
Yeah.
them do, and they're very, very supportive. But I mean, I've somehow became like the homeschool mom that goes to school, that doesn't do much but watch like Big Bang Theory or something. Like I have a very
Yeah.
simple existence, and I like that. I
Hmm.
like it.
One thing that one thing that I thought was interesting when I talked with Khalil about his drug addiction was he explained, he called heroin the Lord of Darkness, and the Lord of Darkness,
Yeah.
and he explains it in a very he explains his experience in a very spiritual framework of light and darkness, and that all of the drugs were, I also would split the hair and say there's some drugs that wouldn't necessarily consider
Yeah.
drugs of abuse, medicine, for
Yeah.
instance, but those drugs were darkness, but the sinister aspect of them was they masqueraded as light.
Yeah. I can see that because I don't know that it sounds weird, but I wasn't a big fan of myself even before drugs. I just wasn't. But after drugs, and I don't know if it was just being grateful and having gratitude or whatever it was, but I learned how to like myself after the drugs because of it's weird how much that darkness can teach you. It's bizarre. I also
What did it teach you?
wow. That's a lot. I feel like it brings me to like a quote that I heard in a rehab. I had a little short left against medical advice visit at a rehab, little tour a couple years ago. Well, couple back when I was still using, and the guy said, "What you give the power to feed you, you give the power to starve you." And I felt like that really encapsulated my whole drug problem. And I learned that that was very true. Um, and I think that drugs really taught me gratitude because I was lacking that. It taught me accountability and I was lacking that. My drug addiction definitely refined who I am today, and it's crazy that it took a IV drug addiction and some trauma to put me on a level playing field with myself, because it was just me against me for so long. And then you got to fit at some point you have to figure out how to like have your own back, pat your own self on the
Yeah.
back too. And I think that I learned that throughout the process.
You might you might say what I learned from my drug addiction was those drugs are bad.
Those are so bad.
But then like I would imagine there's ways that, like you're saying, like some of the accountability and stuff, that the whole experience taught you, like everything's connected to everything.
Oh yeah.
Sort of framework. Like this whole experience taught me so much. Like what are some of the lessons that are you would see in your life every day now that you learned from your experience with drug abuse?
I learned that guilt is the world's most crushing emotion, and guilt perpetuates drug use. Well, for me, guilt kept me continuing to use. It was guilt, guilt, guilt. I learned in my recovery from that the only way to remedy the guilt was to stay in recovery, and that beating yourself up is counterproductive. Because looking back, that's all it was. It was like a constant cycle of hatred, of self-hatred, and guilt, and all these terrible things.
And the drugs were like the breath
Yeah.
in between the just
Yep.
suffering.
And then now it's like I'm human, so every once in a while I definitely get into that weird mindset where you beat yourself up. But then I quickly remember how counterproductive that those mindsets can be. It'll have you right back to those
What do you do in
basements.
yeah, like it's a very interesting thing to think about. Courtney talking to herself in a very horrible way, taking the guilt of falling short of expectations or fucking up scenarios, and instead of metabolizing that and saying, yeah, there are ways that I could be more reliable for my loved ones, etc. And it's not shame. I'm not a piece of shit. I just like one of my favorite phrases in that domain is when I know better, I do better. Like I didn't know better, so I can do better now because I know better. So don't beat myself up. But you didn't have those like healthy thought processes, so you were like accruing more and more fuck ups in your life, and had not yet rewritten the code of how to process when you fuck up. And so it was just getting heavier and heavier and heavier.
Yeah, it was really awful. And then a couple years into recovery, I was gifted The Secret, the book The Secret.
Okay.
and the four
I'm
agreements
familiar.
and the four agreements together. Um, and then that sent me down a rabbit hole about like how powerful your thoughts can be. And then I kind of got scared of self-depreciating thoughts, which was I was really grateful for
Mm,
because, I still really, really battled with that. I'm a big fan of personal development. And I think that that's another thing that came from my drug addiction is now I'm on like a forever journey of self-improvement. Whereas before I was like, this is just who I am and this is just what it is. And that's it. Like there
yeah,
was no hope.
because you saw where that got you.
Yeah. The basements of rock bottom all over again. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of the reading and trying to continually develop into somebody better.
If you don't have the right, like life is happening,
Wild.
man. It is happening right in front of you, right into you. Like life is happening always, and the way that you interpret life is going to make it heavier than you could ever imagine, or it's going to make it rich with meaning and purpose,
Yes.
and in a way that feels aligned. And it's really crazy how important it is to evaluate the frameworks that you have in your mind, how you interpret
Oh,
things.
it's
You know,
everything. I think mindset is everything.
yeah. I mean, do you think your brain is creating, like, when you take a nap, when you sleep, you dream, and your brain just like that, it just gives you just an
Yeah.
experience, and it's not based on any material, anything material. It's not like lights going into your eyes from bouncing off of things, and you're interacting with
Right.
physical reality. You're just kind of like moving through narratives and subconscious concepts and stuff in your psychology. But like in the waking state, there's the raw material of the events of life that's happening all the time, and then you're assigning meaning
Yes.
to it. And so like, you know, your mindset is everything about
I
it.
agree. I completely agree. Oh yeah. I think that mindset is the most powerful thing that you should learn how to really control because
Mm.
restructuring things in your brain, like I like to call it retraining your brain, but I've been on like a constant journey. Instead of chasing the dragon, I'm chasing the retrain, trying to reposition all the things that makes this life easier.
Yeah. Yeah. That's some pretty cool stuff.
It is some pretty cool stuff, I would say.
Um, is there anything else that comes to mind that, I mean, because you have such a wonderful, wonderful story, and it's so inspirational, and it's just inspired me as just a follower and a viewer of your stuff for a while now. And so, is there anything else that maybe you'd like to share with our listener uh, from your experience thus far, or have we touched on most of the major points
I
for
think we
today?
touched on a lot, but I will say, and I'm trying not to be like super corny about it, but I think that in my experience, again, when you're stuck in the active addiction spiral, it's so all or nothing. And I definitely learned that taking one right step after the other, even if it's small steps, it actually matters, and I
Mm.
just kind of always felt like it was all or nothing. Um, and that a setback, what's that quote? A setback. Oh my God, I'm brain farting right now. A setback. Oh my God, it's like my favorite quote. Something about a comeback. Oh my God. Oh, a setback is just a setup for a comeback. And I wish
Oh,
that I would have really understood that. Like I could share the quote on, whatever, I could say it to people, but I didn't really like understand how important it is to like give yourself grace during like a hard and
mm.
terrible journey out. But I mean, it's worth it. It's harder to stay on drugs than it's ever going to be in recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's harder in the
And you probably
struggle.
have to learn that for yourself. You got to get somewhere where you go, okay, this is never going to let up.
Ever. It never ends.
It gives me a little and then takes everything else away. It gives me a little, takes everything else away again and again and again. And when am I going to just go, all right, well, I played that game.
We're done here.
You know? All right, well, played that game, can't win it.
Moving on.
There's for me, something recently that's been really helpful has been beginning to kind of like feel some humility in the face of my own addiction and say, like, oh, I really can't negotiate with this anymore. Like, I really can't, like, I have to admit powerlessness to this thing. Has that been something that's been really helpful to you in your
Oh
journey?
yeah, accountability with it has been huge. And truthfully, I think without it, I don't know how long people stay in recovery without accountability, without kind of like humility and like owning it and like just accepting like this is what's going on, this is who I am, this is what I'm facing. But if you don't do that and it's
Yeah.
still they did this to me or this has happened to me or those things happened, you're just never going to outrun that nightmare mindset. You have to just accept
Yeah.
it.
I can't remember. I think it was Dr. Angie Huberman was talking about the behaviors that you exhibit when you're in addiction, and it was either Andrew Huberman or Anna Lemke, one of the two. I've kind of been back and forth between them a lot, so it kind of merges in my head as one person. But your prefrontal cortex, which is operating the decision making from a logical framework, reasoning framework, is not active in those compulsive driven activities. And so, like, if you give like, it's the age old experiment of the cocaine water to the rat, man. If you give a mouse access to cocaine from pressing a button, it will press the button until it dies.
Oh, absolutely.
Every time, like, without fail, every time. And which is really interesting too. That's what Anna Lemke talks about in her book Dopamine Nation. It's just essentially like our brains are not equipped for a world of abundance. We don't know how to stop. We've lived and survived because there hasn't been enough, and so we've always been on pursuit of finding more. And we have finally reached Hakuna Matata with endless food, endless endless entertainment, endless drugs, endless pornography, sex, and we legitimately do not have the ability for our brains. Our brains cannot exist freely in a world of abundance and exercise control. It can't do it. It's never done it. This is brand new, so don't try.
Get those books for sure, because those sound like something right up my alley.
I realized as I was saying that who said it to me, and it was Dr. Daniel Lieberman. He writes a book called The Molecule of More, and I think you would freaking love that book. It's dopamine. It's just saying dopamine is more, it's more and more, 1 equals 2. It's always exponentially getting more. And it's a really cool behavior into just how we operate as humans. But he said that. He was like, he says in children's books, a lot of times there's, a human that interacts with an animal, and the animal represents essentially a part of ourself that is more instinctual, more primitive, and the human represents more of this prefrontal cortex, neocortex, reasoning, logic, and there's this working balance between the two to be better. And he just says your brain is not equipped to be able to throttle its consumption in abundance. It just can't do it. So quit fucking around with
it. Just stop doing it. Makes
sense. Just stop, man.
Definitely makes sense. I'll be checking out those books for sure.
Yeah, so that's our message to everybody listening today. Just stop.
Just stop. Stop now.
Just stop now. But wait, there's more. You can stop twice. You can stop today and tomorrow.
Day one or one day, right?
Yeah. Yeah, super cool. Cool stuff. Courtney, you rock. You're a rock star. You're an inspiration to me. And keep living in Florida. Keep staying in your mom group. Keep living recovery and being such an inspiration to so many people, including myself.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on here. I really do. I appreciate what you're doing for raising awareness for people.